Welcome to the Year in Review series by Asian Council of Science Editors, and I'm thrilled to be joined by one of my dear colleagues, Liza DeTora, Director of STM Writing at Hofstra University, and we will be discussing the transformative role of generative AI in research writing. Thank you so much, Liza, for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
Let's start with some foundational thoughts on this topic. So, to begin, how would you describe the role of generative AI in research writing?
So that's a really great question. So thank you for asking that. I think that there's a lot of different roles for AI in research writing. And for generative AI, I think people try to use it for many different kinds of tasks. So maybe give it a table of data and see if it can write up some results for you, perhaps put in an article and ask for a brief summary. So those are some of the things that it can do. I know that sometimes people just ask it questions to see what it will say. So sometimes that's a way to generate some ideas as well.
Exactly. So, building on that, what has been the most significant transformations that you have observed this year regarding AI's application in scientific writing?
So the thing for me that I thought was like the most kind of helpful and exciting thing is the role of AI in building bibliographies and publisher systems. So a lot of the publishers, they now have an AI that helps generate the bibliography. It does all the linking back out to the internet, and it actually sometimes it makes up some references, so that's not 100% great, but then it cues you to ask the right questions and to make the corrections. So it's very helpful. It saves hours and hours of work. So that's really quite good.
Exactly. So, in your opinion, how have researchers, educators, and students in STM discipline respond to this increasing use of generative AI with tools like ChatGPT or other?
Okay. So I think it really varies. So some people are very, very much against it, and some people think that they can use it for everything, that, ChatGPT is their new co-author. So there's quite a range. And I think that that's just normal because it's a new technology. So often there'll be people who become very excited about a new technology and want to get very involved, and other people are like, well, maybe I'll wait and see first what the best practice is before I adopt that. So that's basically what I've been seeing kind of across my colleagues.
All right, so let's dig a little bit more deeper for practical implications of AI. So, what are the most notable benefits of generative AI has brought to research writing, especially in STM fields?
So I think that I would say that the biggest possible benefit is with routine tasks. So if you want the AI to help you generate the bibliography, if you want it, and not like tell you the right references, because people do sometimes try to have it do that and it's ill-equipped to do that, but to have it do the references for you, to go through and maybe fix up the grammar in a piece, maybe find ways for the language to be more concise. I mean, obviously, this needs to be checked. Um, and then in just doing routine tasks. So you can give it some data tables and ask it to write up those simple sentences for you, which can be a real savings, particularly of time if you're writing in a language that is not your first language. So, kind of regardless of what your first language is, if you have to write up something in another language, that's very helpful. And I also think that it's quite helpful to have the AI look at your material in an outside language, because then it can find any of these kind of small issues that maybe don't occur to you as a speaker of the language, as kind of not a native speaker.
All right, so on a flip side, what limitation or challenges have emerged with the adoption of generative AI in research writing?
Right. So when I was doing the preparation last night, I was thinking about this question, and the thing that keeps coming up for me in some of these contexts is the AI a co-author? And I keep saying, well, no, it's not really authoring something. So I think that that's the biggest challenge is we've called it artificial intelligence, and then people are tempted to think that it's like a friendly robot or something, and it's not really your friend. It's just kind of an algorithm. So for me, that's the biggest challenge is helping people or thinking about how to discuss the limitations of what the AI can do. And it's not thinking, like it's a chat bot, so it looks like it's chatting, but it's not really thinking up what to chat to you about. So I think that those are some of the challenges. Another challenge I think is for students if they're trying to use a chatbot to generate material because they lack the experience understanding how to kind of keep the chatbot under control or what they need to deliver. So I think that that can be difficult because if you lack the experience, it's very difficult yourself to find the limitations of some other product or project.
All right. So, speaking of challenges, how do you address the concerns about AI generated content impacting originality and academic rigor?
So the big themes for me that come up a lot are, first of all, kind of disclosure. So you need to be honest about what you're using an AI for. And there's lots of different kinds of AIs. So which one are you using and what did you use it for? So what method did you follow? And is it part of your research method? So is it contributing to, is it a tool you used in your research? Or is it something that you're using for editorial purposes? And then how did you use it and for which editorial purposes? So I think that that's a really very big question. And I think people are hesitant to kind of class AI as kind of like an Excel spreadsheet or a SAS database or something like that. Yeah, I mean, you would say like what kind of program that you used, for instance, to generate your tables and figures. So that could be another thing to just disclose in those methods or in the acknowledgments to just say that you used an AI to edit the paper. Another thing, though, is in kind of going back to this theme that the AI is not your co-author, is kind of encouraging people to think about you still have all the same responsibilities that you had before. So the AI doesn't take those responsibilities away from you. It's just another useful tool potentially in your arsenal. So I think those are some challenges. And then, of course, I think for students, again, it's very difficult because they're still learning what it means to author and they're still learning what it means to program in some cases. So this just kind of adds another like possible point of confusion, particularly for the students who are maybe like taking a statistics class that they don't really want to take, but they want to be a nurse or they want to be a health trainer or something. So all of those subtleties are much less interesting to the students than their actual subject matter. So that's another
Yes,
challenge.
so talking about this, I would like to ask one thing. In your opinion, how much the researchers or the users are honest in declaring that who did what and where the AI has been used?
So for me, there's two ways to answer the question. One is it's often very difficult for people to take a step back and think, these are all the things that happened. These are all the people that did them. So even when you have like all humans, it's easy to maybe leave out the data manager by accident. There was a study done maybe 15 years ago in, I don't know if it was AMWA or was like the peer review council in the United States, but Elizabeth Wager did this study, and the most frequent ghostwriter in industry sponsored research were statisticians because people would just forget to include them on the paper. So they'd have a statistician, but there would be one often that they just forgot that that person had done something. So that's one piece of it, is that it's very easy to forget that you did it. And then in terms of if people are kind of not sure, are they allowed to say that they did it? Are they allowed to use it? I think that's another obstacle for them. And then that's where going back to like the journal guidelines. So if you go to the journal guidelines first and then you follow that, you don't come into the problem. It's like, oh, it says not to use AI. Then, I think that that also becomes a question for people. So I think that on the whole, people want to be honest. It's just that they're often not sure how to do that. And if you're in kind of a hurry or in a high pressure research situation, I think it becomes very easy to forget these things, or you write yourself a note, I need to check on how to do this, and then it goes out and you forgot to do it.
Exactly. So, when it comes to ethical considerations, what are the ethical boundaries that researchers and students should observe while using AI tools in scientific writing?
Okay, that's a great question. So, you need to just follow all the same ethical principles that you always follow. There are some, so for research or disclosure or like doing your own work. So maybe don't ask the AI to generate your discussion points for you. Maybe if you want it to fix up your discussion point wording, you can do that. So take responsibility for the intellectual portions of the work. Don't give the AI any intellectual tasks to do because it really can't do them. Like following the guidelines. So following the same ethical guidelines always. But I think the other questions that come up with AIs are kind of broader questions. So if suddenly everyone's using an AI for editing, what happens to all the people who do that as their work? So are we kind of like tanking out some sort of job role? Are we depriving people of their jobs? Or is this a case where maybe people need some retraining? AIs also, they use a lot of energy. So we could kind of think about resources and the environment and sustainability in terms of this use. So the more things that we're putting into these kind of big computing systems, what is that? And then also, there's only so much capacity for the AI. So are we kind of thinking judiciously about how we're using that? And are we taking up capacity from something that might be better served in using that? So those are some of the things that I would think about.
All right. So continuing on ethics, there are a lot more debate that AI chat GPT can be an author or not. And some journals, they encourage to disclose the use of AI tools. In some journals, they are strict to using AI in writing and etc. So how should authors disclose the use of generative AI in their manuscripts, in your opinion?
Okay. So the first thing I'd say is that the author needs to be able to take responsibility for the work. So the AI can't do that. So they really can't be an author. Also, they can't really think things up. So they really are not an author. In terms of disclosing, it depends on the journal. So the first thing that you do, in my opinion, before you use the AI is check your journal guidelines. Or if you're working in a regulated context, I think there's some regulatory authorities that aren't very keen on the use of AI unless it's been cleared with them first. So you need to make sure that you've done that properly. So for me, if you're using the AI as part of how you're generating the research, so for instance, if you're doing a systematic literature review and you use an AI tool to help tabulate that information or to help generate the summaries, maybe you put that into the methods section because that's a method that you used in order to put together the contents of the work. Or if you're using the AI to kind of summarize some of the high level data out of data tables, and that's so you can put that into a method section along with like kind of how you tabulated your data. If it's just kind of purely editorial, you could maybe put that into the acknowledgments. But again, I think that the journal editors are really the leaders here, and we really need to respect the opinion of each different journal editor. So there's not just one answer. It must be particular to that journal or to that meeting. So if it's a scientific meeting or a congress, we need to respect that. Or a regulatory body, we need to follow whatever the rules are for the situation.
For an other side, usage of AI in academic writing, how important do you think is it to train researchers and students to use generative AI more responsibly?
Well, I think it's really vital. And I think going back to that, one of the earlier questions is like, how are people coping? There's a very wide variety of response to generative AI. So for the people who are very innovative, they are often quite excited about the AI and look at all these great things we can do with this. So they tend to be more enthusiastic about showing students how the students can benefit from using AI. And the question there is like, are they also learning the skills they need to evaluate what the AI is doing? For people who are very resistant to using AI, then there's multiple hurdles to get over because they need to first overcome their reluctance to use the AI and then think about how it could benefit students and then train the students. So I do think it's important. I teach in our chemistry department with a colleague, and one of the units we did in our chemistry communication class was on AI and AI usage. And it was interesting to me what the students came up with because we asked them to think through the ethical considerations and using AI in scientific writing. And they really came up with some concerns that I didn't anticipate that they would come up with. So one of those students was like, "Oh, well, it's a computing program, so it's a big energy hog." Or maybe over relying on the AI means you're not doing your job, or maybe it means that you're not developing your own skills. And if you don't develop those skills yourself, maybe you can't be an effective mentor for other people. So I think also because students are very technologically savvy in a lot of ways, that we could think about this as a partnership rather than kind of a top-down training.
Yes, so speaking of initiative, what initiatives specifically have Hofstra University undertaken to integrate AI literacy into STM and writing programs?
So, as I said, we've got a big range. So there's not just kind of like one initiative. It's not, and we've got lots of little different initiatives. So many individual educators are using AI in different ways in their classes, or they're telling students, don't use a generative AI because you need to learn this particular skill. So I think we've got a lot of that type of transparency. Hofstra runs a teaching and learning kind of a symposium every January, and there's always AI sessions at that. And 2 years ago, we had a presidential symposium that was all about AI and AI usage. So it seems to be worked into a lot of different things. And the other thing that started happening, there's a group that does evaluations. So they're trying to get faculty members to think about how well they're imparting the different proficiencies from their classes. So they've started incorporating questions about AI into those kinds of endeavors as well. So it's, how do I say this? They're not really AI initiatives so much as thinking about how do we work AI into all of our existing initiatives.
Exactly. So, looking ahead, how do you see the generative AI shaping the future of research writing in the upcoming years?
So I think that that's a really great question. And I think as we've been discussing, there's lots of different ways to use AI, and there are a lot of different considerations for the use of AI and whether it's a good idea or a bad idea. So I think in the coming years, that what will happen is we'll be out of this space where there's like so many people who are just kind of excitedly newly innovating, and so many people who are like, I'm not really sure what this is and I don't know what to do with it. Like their curve will have moved so that those folks who are very hesitant are kind of now in like, oh, okay, well, this is just a thing we use now. So once you have a larger body of people making use of the kind of the tools or the proficiencies or the resources, then you start to get best practice emerging. So I would imagine seeing something like that. Of course, the AI itself is also kind of changing and innovating. One of the things I've noticed, though, with things that are smart, is they also get to a point where they're a little too smart for their own good. So I'd imagine we'd kind of hit a point where there'd be a little bit of correction there, and then we'd have better AI tools that might be suited for specific needs. One of the things that I did when I was preparing last night is I asked ChatGPT one of the questions, and it came up with this whole giant thing with all these headings and these different considerations, and the ethics and the logistics and economics and feasibility. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting because I don't know that I would have thought about that. But it seems to me that as opposed to like 2 years ago, if I'd asked ChatGPT the same question, it would not be coming up with basically an essay with multiple headings for me. It would have just come up with a certain amount of text. So I'm thinking that there'll be more and more like maybe a full document being generated, and then that will create lots of different other jobs for people to do. So, one of the things that AI keeps making me think about is I'm old enough to remember the 1980s and 90s, and it's like, okay, well, with the computers coming up, we'll have so much less paper, and that just isn't correct. We have so much more paper now. There's so much more work to do now with so much more paper because the computer made it easy to generate all this paper. So one would think that, oh, there'll be so much less editing and there'll be so much less text. It's like, I don't think there will. I think the AI will just be creating very different jobs for people to do intellectually and kind of maybe removing some of the more mechanical jobs from people, but kind of opening up different ways that people are going to need to intervene in the work of computer systems.
Yes, and you have raised a very important point. I would say that using AI is like not a problem, but using it more responsibly is the more area that we need to focus. So, what steps can the broader academic community should take to ensure that the AI tools or generative AI are used responsibly and effectively in scientific writing?
Um, so as you're asking these questions, we keep kind of talking about scientific writing. One of the things I was thinking about was the big Screen Actors Guild strikes that we had in the United States and other places. And AI and generative AI was a huge issue because what they were trying to do in contracts was saying, okay, we're going to take your image and now we can use your image forever in perpetuity without paying you anymore. And that is effectively ending the jobs of many of these people. And they were like, well, no, that's not ethical. You can't just do that. So, and it was a big, long, hard fight. So for me, it's like if people are trying to kind of insert AI in to kind of take over jobs that people are doing now. And for me, in scientific writing or medical writing or like industry writing, there's so many job clusters in like Korea or India or Japan or Vietnam, where people are doing this kind of work. And it's easy in the United States to not think it's like, oh, okay, well, we're going to use the AI for that now. And then what happens to this industry that grew up in order to support these kinds of needs? So I think that there should be some attention paid to kind of ethically treating the humans who are currently in supportive roles. But I also think that we need to really consider like how do you maintain AIs and develop them and what kinds of professionals need to be in those roles? I know that a lot of kind of computing and programming industries right now, like in the United States and in European countries, which I'm a little bit more familiar with, those aren't necessarily thriving industries in the ways that they once were. And then that has effects for other parts of the world. So if we're moving to this model, like, are you picking up all the educated people who are now doing editing and maybe retraining them into these roles? It's like, what are you doing in order to kind of build the right pipelines so that you have sustainable activity and expertise to support these new directions? And also, how are we going to sustainably support the people who exist and who have these educations and who are part of this field? It's like, how are we going to treat them as colleagues? And again, AI is kind of interesting to me because it can do things like indexing. Now, that is a profession, or it was a profession. And in the United States, it was a profession for a very long time, and it got offshored. So, as there was kind of a large upsurge of people earning PhDs in India and Pakistan and other countries in Asia, then that created a job market that was more economical for publishers to use, in part because the salaries were lower, but I think more importantly, because it fosters a 24-hour workday so that you can kind of clean up that indexing work overnight
Exactly.
and then you're not losing it on the other side of the world. But that really took away a field of endeavor for people in the United States, and they needed to find something else that they needed to be doing. So as AI is coming in, it's creating in some of these regions a situation that was had to be dealt with in the West. And depending on the legal and regulatory frameworks for worker protections, I think those could be an issue. But there's also, I think, the issue of energy usage and access to internet and
Mhm.
infrastructure. In the United States, again, which I keep talking about, I realize we're a wealthy nation. There are many, many parts of the US where people just don't have access to internet or to satellite or to broadband. And it's like, okay, if that's the case in like Idaho, like what's the case in other regions and what's the case in regions where, maybe the economic next steps are to put in roads rather than to put in internet. And like, how do we kind of keep everybody on the planet together? I realize these are broad questions, and I always get into these big philosophical things that maybe those of us who are just using Chat GPT to kind of, get some email done, it's not the same thing. But I think that these are broader questions to consider.
Exactly. So thank you so much, Lisa, for sharing your expertise and insights for using AI in scientific writing, medical writing. This whole conversation with you has shed light on the transformative role of generative AI in research writing and the importance of navigating its challenges more responsibly. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on this episode of Year in Review 2024 series by Asian Council of Science Editors. Thank you once again for joining me today.
Oh, thank you for having me.